In the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
Meantime. Perfect. So do you want me to share slides?
Yeah, if that's okay.
Okay. Um, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Um, okay. Perfect. I'm going to start it now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes for some people to join. And then we're going to get started. Perfect. We have Dr. Mike Gradizar and Alessandro Massaro with us today. I can see there's quite a few people joining. Perfect. I'll just start with the introductions in the meantime, conscious of time. Thank you for everyone joining us today. As I mentioned, I'm here today with Dr. Mike Gradizar joining us from SleepCycle. He's a sleep researcher and clinical psychologist specialized in sleep research. And then Dr. Alessandra Massaro is joining us from Therapyside as a health and clinical psychology with over 10 years of experience in training and coaching. I don't know if you want to say a few words just before we
Well,
start.
yeah, it's just great to be here. Especially with the huge group of people with WellHub. This is, I don't know, my third or fourth time doing a seminar, and these are always really great. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A at the end because a lot of people ask some really cool questions. So I'll hand over to Alessandro.
Yeah, same to me. Nevertheless, it's my first time, so I'm new to this format, and of course, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm really excited to just share our experience with you all, and yeah, looking forward for the Q&A.
Oh, thank you both. So we're just going to kick off with a quick quiz just to get started, and then go into the topics of discussion for today. So let me know if you can see my screen. It should pop up with the amazing. Thank you, everyone. There's either the QR code or the game pin you can join with. So I'll leave a couple of moments for everyone to set up on their phones. In the meantime, this is just a few icebreaker questions to then inform Mike's and Alessandro's discussion throughout the webinar so they can get a bit of insights into your sleep and emotional regulation habits. Great, I can see quite a few people joining, which is amazing. Great. That's great to see all this engagement. Great. We see the topic of today is all about, as I mentioned, sleep and emotional regulation. So obviously how good sleep hygiene then helps you work and regulate your emotions throughout your day, your work day, in and outside the workplace, hopefully. Okay, I can still see there's quite a few people joining, which is amazing. So thank you for all the great engagement. minute. I think we can probably get started with the quiz. There's still a few people joining, so I want to give some time for everyone to be able to join. Fine. Great. I think I'm going to move on, just conscious of time. Sorry for anyone that's not able to join as we speak. So first question, how many hours of sleep do you think you get in a night? Some time to answer here. So this is the usual categories. So less than 6, around 6 or 7, 7 or 8, or more than 8. I personally definitely get more than 8 hours of sleep a night. So great. Cool. I think most of the people fell within 6 or 7, which is probably the average, but I'll let the experts speak on this afterwards. So on to the next question. What thoughts come to mind before you fall asleep? So is it either past events, future events, worrying about how much sleep you're getting, or worrying about your sleep environment when you're actually going to bed? There. Great. So most of you worry about future events. So I think I'll hand it over to the experts now to kind of start this discussion today based on the results of the poll as well.
Thanks for that, Ilaria. Yeah, I think this one's quite interesting because I'd like to know what you think as well as Alessandro, because I think, often when you're sort of seeing people one-on-one, you hear about their concerns and their worries and their actual phrases when they're trying to fall asleep. And this is really interesting to get over 100 people and to sort of see that the future events is the biggest category here. I don't know what your clinical experience is in terms of how much this comes up for you.
Yeah, same. And what is interesting is to see that when the mechanisms, when we think about future events, what they trigger in our bodies and our emotions, and even in our thoughts, just it's quite interesting. So yeah, I guess we can dig into that.
Yeah, precisely. Ilaria, is there any chance to share the slides so we can sort of like segue into, I
Yeah,
guess, the results and what we've seen also in research and clinical practice?
yeah, let me do that now.
Thank you.
Here you go. Perfect. You should now be able to see my slides.
There we go. Thank you. G'day, everybody. I'm sound Australian. I am Australian. I'm speaking from Europe. So I am in your time zone. But I think it's really important to provide a bit of education because oftentimes we can have these experiences night after night where we're not sleeping well and we feel stressed and we do worry. And sometimes it can be a little bit confusing about what's happening. And therefore, finding a solution could be quite hard. So, what we hope to provide to you is a bit of education, at least on this slide here. And then I'll hand over to Alessandra, who's going to be doing an exercise and take you with it that you can practice now and hopefully practice later on, even tonight. So, really, when we're thinking about stress and sleep, really they are opposing forces. So, stress is a normal thing that we do have, but sometimes it can interfere with sleep. Really, if we think about stress not being around, we actually go through different states of awareness and arousal throughout the day. And as we are preparing for sleep, we naturally are winding down mentally, emotionally, and physiologically. However, something like stress can get in the way of all three of those. It can actually start to disrupt our process of gradually physically winding down. So, the concept I want to sort of impart to you is a concept known as hyperarousal. So, If we look at it from even what we would call a circadian rhythm approach, a circadian rhythm being our body clock, a rhythm of 24 hours, the peak of our circadian rhythm is around about 7 to 8 p.m. at night. This is when we have our highest internal core body temperature. And when you have a high internal core body temperature, mentally you are also alert. It's also the hardest time to fall asleep. However, after that, our core body temperature actually starts to decline and we start to feel more calm and sleepy. That's a natural process. So our arousal levels are decreasing over those couple of hours. However, you can get this additional arousal added to it, and we call it hyperarousal. This is just specific to the evening that we're going to be talking about, but hyperarousal can even be a 24/7 type of issue. So, in terms of the different types or categories of arousal, the first one is somatic arousal. So, sometimes people are aware that when they're trying to fall asleep and they might have difficulty falling asleep, that they might sort of notice their heart beating or their heart racing. They might or may not notice that their breathing is a little bit irregular, shallow, or sometimes they're really holding their breath as well. Their muscles might be tense and they're not aware of that unless they focus on those different types of muscles and pay attention to them more. They might sort of have a little bit of a stomach cramp or not feeling so well. And when we measure their brainwave activity, this is through electroencephalograms, which is EEG, we do find as well that people that can have this state of hyperarousal, mainly people with insomnia, they can have high activity, even demonstrated in their brainwaves. So that's one aspect of hyperarousal, but hyperarousal can also be triggered. So there can be different things that sort of set it off. Some of the classic ones are just the time on the clock. So people can sometimes see the time and then they can start to then worry and start to have those physiological responses. Another one that I've heard about is that people fear when the sun sets. They have this sense of dread that the night is now beginning, and they have developed this fear over time. But probably the classic one that is coming up the most, at least in my clinical practice, and I only specialize in sleep, is that people say they can often feel sleepy, but when they turn the light off and or they put their phone down, that when their head hits the pillow, that's when all of the thoughts start coming to the front of their mind, which is what we were sort of asking you in the previous slide there. I might sort of throw over to Alessandro at this point and sort of, what sort of types of triggers do you see in your clinical practice when it comes to sleep or anything else?
Yeah, pretty much the same. And then what happens is that as we go along, if we don't make adjustment to this, then these triggers can be conditioned. So every time the clock arrives at 8, 9 p.m., we start to get fear response about going to sleep. And that is not a good response from the body because fear is not an emotion that can help us go to sleep. Just imagine going to the woods and then you're starting, you have your backpack and you put your camping tent and you're inside cozy, but then you hear, footsteps of an animal growing. That will trigger probably a fear response. And that is a evolutionary mechanism that when the fear is in our bodies, going to sleep is probably not going to help us to survive. But the thing is, with these triggers, we start without, unconsciously, without realizing, starting to condition fear responses to, triggers that, stimuli, that, for example, clock time or pillow, that, ignite fear, and that it's, a downward spiral that can go deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I love that example you provided because I've got friends over here from North America, and we actually talked about camping in Canada, and we talked about bears, which is one of my fears. And I can imagine that I would not sleep at night at all. And I think that's a lovely approach because for me, it'd almost be like I wouldn't sleep all night because there's this, potential threat. Whereas a lot of people don't sleep at night because they have this perceived threat that's actually not an immediate danger. And I think, in our discussions beforehand, we've sort of mentioned about that perception of the threat versus the real threat. So that's great. And then just finally, before I hand over to Alessandro again, there is that cognitive element of hyperarousal, and maybe that ties in with that elevated EEG. And basically, it is that sort of thinking and worrying and planning forward about what we've got to do. That's the planning aspect. And there's also that rehearsal aspect, what has happened, reflecting on things that happened during the day or even during the week or the past month, and probably looking at it through a sort of an unhelpful sort of lens. It's quite interesting that we're sort of noticing almost like people's, dare I say, negative thinking, and this type of thinking in the literature is now called perseverative negative thinking. It's almost like this uncontrolled negative thinking that sometimes takes a life of its own. It is that this is the sort of thing that you almost have to put a spoke in the wheel. You have to be aware of it. You have to therefore probably pay attention and change direction when it comes to this type of thinking. So with that, I'd probably like to hand over to Alessandro, who's going to take us through a lovely technique that we can practice now and into the future.
Yeah, so for this technique, and I will tie it to maybe a question that someone put in the chat. But for this technique, I will suggest to have a piece of paper, pen and pencil, to write something down, because this writing technique can help us breaking the pattern of, automatic thinking. Because when we write down something that we are worried about, we are transforming this internal thought, which is something abstract because we cannot touch a thought. But when we write it down, we are translating this thought into a movement of our hands. So that's something motor that we activate. But then we also see that with our eyes. So then we activate also the visual part of our brain. So, and then we reprocess that in a way. So I call this, and this is I'm going to put this technique as in different category, because it's a fusion of many things. Okay. So one is the writing. So let's write down what typically comes to our mind that might trigger a fear response. Okay. And when I talk about this is because, think about what I said before about the tiger in the camping trip. Our mind has two types of fear. One is the actual tiger that can, we can be in contact with, and that is, a real threat. So fear there is adaptive. But then the second fear is the tiger we have in our heads. So sometimes when we are preparing to go to sleep, we then start to thinking about a meeting, travel, a conflict with our boss, with our colleague, a problem with a client, an email that I have to respond in first time in the morning. So without realizing, just by thinking about it, I'm actually igniting an internal response as if I'm watching a tiger in real life, okay? So this is the thing we have to realize, that even though our bodies are laying down on the bed, my head is not laying down on the bed, is trying to solve the conflict, and that will ignite adrenaline, all type of, cortisol levels or hormones that are raising up, and we can get into that hyperarousal that Mike told us about. So let's take a moment to brain dump everything that we might typically feel that at night it pops out in our heads. So let's take 30 seconds to 1 minute to just jolt it down. You can draw, you can paint, you can write down the things in categories, in phrases, in words, and just giving 20 more seconds to do so. Okay, and this is what we can do if we find ourselves in that moment. As we do this technique, then we interiorize it, and we don't need to do it to the writing part, but it's kind of like journaling. All right. So, okay. Now, next step, we take this piece of paper with the things that we have written down. We take a look at it, and then we start. And I don't see myself, but probably yeah, write the piece of paper and I put it like a ball, and I'll put it in my non-dominant hand. Okay, so if I write with the right, I put it on the left, and then I have this piece of paper close to my fist, right? So I put my fist in a relaxed position, and I will ask you to have in this moment, since we are more than 200 people, I cannot see what body posture you have, but try to find a comfortable position, because we're gonna do a technique that, well, it's focused on the breathing, it's focused on many things, and maybe the posture, we can adjust it to be comfortable enough. So let's hold this piece of paper, and what I would like you to do is to hold it in a very strong grip. Not as strong that, it hurts, but strong enough that I feel the tension in the muscles, and I feel that power that I'm putting in there. And as I can do this exercise with my eyes closed, but it doesn't matter if to have it closed, I can leave it open. You can place your eyes in your desk or in a position and just leave it there, focusing on what you have written down. As you hold in that grip, try to think about everything that you have written down, and not just the words that you can visualize and remember, but also what you might feel on those situations. And if those situations are strong enough, just close and take that, a stronger grip of that piece of paper, as if you are transmitting all that energy of your body response into that piece of paper, into that ball of paper. And we can hold it there and just hold it for 1 minute, just pressing it there. Just don't relax the muscle yet. Your forearms, your hand, just hold it there, hold it a little bit more. Think about another situation. And as you're breathing in and out consciously, just hold that tighter and tighter. Now you start by feeling a little tiredness in the muscles, the energy there. And what I would like you to do as you're breathing in and out, just breathing like in 4 seconds, for example, hold it in 2, and as you exhale in 7 or 8 seconds, try to relax the muscles, try to loosen the grip with that piece of paper, try to loosen up little by little, not from 100 to 0, but imagine that 100 is the strongest grip you had. Go to 99, 97, 96, as you're breathing in and out. So breathing in 4 seconds, hold it for 2, and try to exhale, maybe through your nose or through your mouth, as whatever it feels more comfortable, as you're relaxing your hand. And as you're relaxing your hand and your arm, you can feel the different sensations that are changing from being in a strong grip to loosen the muscles. And as you feel that is opening up your hand, you might also feel a little stuck in some ways. You might experience a difficulty maybe of opening up your hand. And this is something that usually tends to happen. That when we hold on to something for so long, our body struggles to let go. So make a conscious effort to breathing in as you are enjoying this playfulness of this activity. So as you're breathing in 4 seconds, hold for 2, and exhale in 7 and 8. And try to be playful about it. Just be curious to see how your maybe fingers are like stuck, like there's glue there that is holding everything together. But as you exhale, you're making a conscious decision to gently and slowly allow your hand to open up. And there's gonna be a moment that maybe you start discovering that without realizing, that piece of paper will fall off of your hand, and you put that angle of the hand in such a way that you allow gravity to pull that piece of paper so gravity can make all the work as well. And as you do that, you're breathing in 4, hold for 2, exhale 7 and 8, and just allow in this couple of seconds to 1 minute to play with this activity, with this technique, until you feel your hand is open, gently allowing that piece of paper to let go. And as soon as you hear that piece of paper letting go, falling maybe into the floor or into the desk or wherever situation you might be in, just take a moment to feel your hand, your arm being relaxed after all that effort you put in. So as you're breathing in and out, trying to expand that sensation from your hand to your arm, to your chest, to your back. Breathing in, breathing out slowly to your other arm, to your other hand, to your legs. Feeling the whole body in this moment. And just focusing there. And if a thought comes in, pops out, curious to see what's happening, just realize that. Maybe say, I realize that I have this thought. And just step out gently and allowing yourself to go back to your breathing. So let's just focus for 30 more seconds in our breath. Breathing in 4 seconds, hold for 2, exhale in 7 and 8. And we are almost concluding this technique, so you can practice it maybe this night. You can have that piece of paper close to your, in your bed, your bedroom, thinking about this, expanding it more, and taking 1, 2, or 3 deep in breath and out breath. And whenever you feel ready, if you have your eyes closed, you can gently allow your eyes to be open, to see the light, to see the shades, the shapes, feeling the body, and reorienting yourself to continue this wonderful webinar. And I allow Mike to continue.
Thank you very much for that, Alessandro. I love the sort of focus on the thought as well as that physical aspect. Like, from what we talked about before with the hyperarousal and the somatic sort of side of things, the fact that you're not sort of focused on your heart, for instance, you might be focused on your hands. You're not necessarily focused on what you're going to do tomorrow. You're focused on just that and that letting go, which is a nice metaphor. Thank you. And Stephen, I think I'm just acknowledging that you've asked a question in the chat, and we will get to that in a moment. So anyone else who has questions that they'd like to ask us, by all means, feel free to sort of ask a question in the chat. So in the previous slide, we were really talking about how stress can affect our sleep, but it's actually what you would call a bidirectional relationship between stress and sleep. So people can clearly identify through their own experiences when they've felt stressed at night and they've had a bad night's sleep. It might be less obvious that when we are not sleeping well, that we can then have issues regulating our emotions, including our stress. And I just want to sort of go through, I guess, some of the causes of that. One that is a little bit hard to sort of detect, but it's a new theory that's been coming out in the sleep science world. It's something called REM sleep fragmentation. So if you've never heard of REM sleep, it's rapid eye movement sleep. It is actually a highly activated type of sleep from an EEG level. The EEG is highly active like we are now. The benefit is that we stay asleep and we don't act out our dreams because we're more likely to have our dreams during REM sleep because we go through muscle paralysis. There's actually a type of sleep disorder called REM behavior sleep disorder where people don't have that paralysis during REM sleep and they actually act out their dreams. So therefore, that paralysis, as scary as it sounds, is actually protective for us. And so, what some researchers have really theorized is that with this hyper arousal that we can get potentially in the evening and throughout the night, that can almost like break up our REM sleep. So we don't have this continuous REM sleep. And REM sleep has been implicated in our emotion regulation. So therefore, it's almost like breaks in the story of trying to process that. And it probably happens to REM sleep because REM sleep is a little bit fragile. Even, say, for example, if you are someone that tends to snore, even if you have what's called apneic events, where people sort of have a restriction in their breathing, you're more likely to have that in REM sleep than any other stage of sleep. So there's essentially this relationship that's been found with the more fragmentations that have been found for people with REM sleep, that they will also report or self-report higher emotional issues such as anxiety and stress. Another one is if you're not getting enough sleep. So we asked that question at the beginning, and I guess we should address it and answer it. Really, when you look at probably 20 years ago, there was this idea that people should get at least 8 hours of sleep. But with another couple of decades of research, two things have been noticed. One is that people are more likely, if you look across the population, the peak number of people are going to report around 7 hours of sleep. And what's fascinating is that there is not a linear relationship between the amount of sleep you get and how healthy you are. When people are matching the amount of sleep that people are getting to some sort of health outcome, getting way too much sleep, so sometimes really more than 9 hours of sleep can, in some instances and for some health outcomes, not be so great. And certainly something less than 6, but definitely something less than 5 on a continuous basis. This is also indicative of poor health outcomes. So in some ways, 7 seems to be a sweet spot, but there's a number of hours of sleep around that. And one thing people should be aware of is that the amount of sleep that you get or your sleep need is somewhat under genetic and biological control. You might even find that people like your parents, brothers, sisters, and so forth, they might have the same amount of sleep or be a short sleeper like yourself if you are one of those people, or a long sleeper. So, generally speaking, if you're getting less quantity of sleep because stress is getting in the way, it's somewhat dependent on how you are functioning the next day. So if you have this sort of like morning or daytime fog, this sort of cloud in front of you, that can also be an indication, and it's highly related to emotional dysregulation on that day. Sometimes it can be perceived that you have this sort of negative lens that you're looking through when you're looking at your particular day. But the research has actually shown it's not necessarily our negativity that increases, it's our positivity that decreases when we're not getting enough sleep. It doesn't necessarily stay that way. We do catch up with sleep. And I think this is the important thing, is that people sort of fear that they're not going to sleep well ever again. But sleep is under a homeostatic, balanced approach. You will eventually catch up. It sometimes is basically having some things getting in the way. And what we're talking about today is the stress. And hopefully in our Q&A, we might be able to provide some particular solutions on top of the technique that Alessandro was able to give. So probably with that, I think we've got just our final key takeaways that myself and Alessandro want to give you guys. We were asked this of Ilaria from Well and it's a hard thing to sort of pick one thing that you want people to sort of take away from this. I would say that whenever you are trying to implement a behavioral change, and I'm coming at this from a scientific point of view, its measurement is always important. To do it before and after, to sort of really observe the changes that have happened for you. I would say that if you are going to make any changes that around your sleep, it's important before you implement those changes to measure your sleep beforehand and sort of check in every week just to sort of see how you're going and how your sleep may have changed if you are implementing those things. So Alessandra, what do you think? What's your key takeaway?
Yeah, I think That is a very good point, because that measure, you can actually use it, to see progress. And in the cases, because we are sharing some information, and of course, in my clinical practice, I help, people that sometimes cannot self-regulate. So we using, the practice that we have done, for example, is just a tip of the iceberg. But if we need to dive deeper, maybe on understanding all these things that are blocking our good night's sleep, maybe, for example, from the EHR department and with WellHub through Therapyside, there's also an availability of, accessing, therapy, right? Depending on the plan you have and a certain number of sessions. So you can find a therapist or a specialized professional that can help you, guide you through this process. Okay. And also, if there is HR in the room, because we are so many also, from the WellHub and Therapyside, we can offer specific workshops like this one, to treat different subjects that you are interested in.
Cool, thank you. So with that, I think that concludes us, having our discussion, and now we can discuss things with a wonderful audience, a huge audience actually, and they've already started to ask a bunch of questions.
I was looking at the chat. I think at the beginning of the webinar, you were discussing difficulties falling asleep and the triggers. Stephen asked if people suffer more from this, I guess, difficulties falling asleep during particular days of the week, thinking of Sunday evenings, for example.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, Stephen, I thought of a client of mine that was definitely, his insomnia was absolutely peaking on a Sunday. He was really worried about the upcoming week, and in terms of triggers, he even started to worry on Saturday eventually. So yeah, it can be for some people. I would say from a research perspective, we actually categorized, we did this with adolescents, and adolescents aren't too different from adults. They actually do have similar worries in terms of rehearsal and planning, but they probably have more concerns about friends as opposed to family when they're sort of having difficulties falling asleep. But we actually found that weekdays, or school days, school nights, those were the times when they were most likely to be affected with their sleep and their worries. And weekends, they were a lot better. But yeah, Alessandro, I'm not sure about your experience and what you've noticed.
Yeah, even though we talked about future things, so coming into the Sunday, we are thinking about the not just the Monday, but the whole week. And the more activities we have and the more things we are planning. If we have 3 kids and we have to take them to school and to soccer and to this, but I have to have this doctor appointment, then I have to travel, and all of this can play out in our heads on Sunday evening. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good way to, if we think that is the case in those days. For example, this technique that we use today to jot down everything and to brain down there, and maybe that can lead us to another type of techniques, which could be prioritize, organize, accept what we can control. Because the focus here is to try not to let the mind wander too much on the future and the past, but more into the present. And when we do that, instead of allowing our minds to go to the future and the past, we also avoid the mind to focus on what we don't have and what we don't can control, because that's the perfect recipe for hyperarousal, anxiety, and stress. To focus on the future, on the things that I don't have, which could be my resources and abilities and stuff, and the things that I can control. But if we train our brain that with everything that we have to worry about on Sunday evening, on the things that I, writing down, okay, what can I control? What can I do? What I have my skills, my abilities, or even if I can find, because I think maybe, to whom I can ask for, support and help and guidance that can help us to ease that worry.
Lovely.
Someone else was asking more so during your discussion, what if I have disrupted sleep because you physically cannot remain asleep and constantly wake up?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because sometimes you're not aware of what's waking you up. So this really requires more investigation, firstly for the individual, which is maybe think of two buckets. Is it something within you that's waking you up, or is it something externally? So, say for example, is it your bed partner moving? Is it your bed partner snoring? Like people don't realize there was this lovely study that showed that a third of our awakenings occur because we sleep next to someone, but we love sleeping next to someone because of the security and the warmth and so forth. So, is it something like that? Is it something like we are overheating as well? Because we are trying to release heat from the body overnight. And if that is getting trapped by your clothes, also by your linen, if it's also the fact that you're sharing a doona or a bed cover with your partner that's also generating heat, that can also be something that wakes you up. Or is it something that's more sort of internal? And I think the classic big one is sort of sleep disordered breathing slash snoring. That seems to be something that a lot of people are not aware of. I might sort of do a bit of a plug here and say that at SleepCycle, we are currently doing a clinical investigation to see if we can develop an algorithm just using our phone to be able to detect the risk of sleep apnea. So hopefully within the next year, some that will be released.
Yeah, there was a lot of people in the comments mentioning they have issues with their partner snoring, so that disrupts sleep a lot. I don't know if you have any suggestions for that. I think there was quite a few comments coming about snoring specifically. Um,
Yeah, I would say that in interviewing many people over the last 2 decades, the ones that managed to have their partner go and see a doctor, the most common reason for that was that the person wanted to stop getting elbowed in the ribs. That is absolutely serious. So it is really partner driven here. I think, there can be health concerns from snoring. In fact, snoring is related to, there are some studies that show it's related to cancer and other metabolic disorders. There is something about this restriction of oxygen and so forth during the night, night after night, that can be harmful potentially. But it's not the health consequences that are driving people to the doctors, especially males. It's actually socially driven. It's about their partners really just persisting in getting them to go to the doctor.
um, Great, thank you for answering that. Someone else was asking if there's any particular reason for waking up with a fear of falling from stairs or cliff. Um, I've actually experienced that as well, so it would be interesting to know if there is a reason for that.
I can see Alessandro thinking about this.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. And maybe Mike can point out what happens, physically when we are falling asleep, because we are, like he said, if we have plugged our brains into EEG, we might go into beta waves to, alpha, and we are slowing our brain activity. And it's like shutting down some of the activity of the body, and that might feel like falling out of a cliff. I've experienced it myself, and it's quite scary. And I've also I've experienced, uh, but I haven't researched what it is exactly. That it seems like you are awake, but your body's asleep, so you feel kind of afraid. And well, I've trained myself to be okay in that state, and actually to accept that fact that when I feel that falling from a cliff or falling from something, it is actually going to sleep. So maybe what happens, and maybe Mike can clarify, is that your body is moving in a way, falling asleep in a different rhythm than the conscious level. Because when we fall asleep, we actually don't realize if we are when we fall asleep. So maybe there is a mismatch. But yeah, I would like to hear from Mike about it.
Yeah, I was really keen to hear what you were going to say because this is not an area of research that I've looked at, but it's certainly an experience that many people have spoken about, and it's more likely to happen in the sleep onset process as people are trying to fall asleep at the start of the night. There is a term called hypnagogic jerks, So I would suggest researching that. And when I say research, do your ChatGPT thing. But if you're using ChatGPT, ask it for to provide some scientific references for it, so you can sort of get into what is actually the science behind it. That would be my suggestion.
Oh, thank you. I think there's another couple of questions. We still have some time. In the Q&A, someone was asking, my difficulty is staying asleep, wake up around 2, 3 a.m., no matter what day of the week. This suggests cortisol cycle disruption. What could be any steps to delay cortisol release to allow me to sleep throughout the night until 6 a.m.?
Yeah, so the question is, they believe they
Delay cortisol release to basically sleep throughout the night.
well, probably as background, I did mention circadian rhythms and the 24-hour rhythms where we have a peak and a trough. And with cortisol, usually if your body clock is aligned to where you want it to sleep, usually you should have very little to no cortisol over the night. Cortisol decreases as on the approach to sleep and it rises thereafter. That's sort of like looking at the forest type of approach when it comes to cortisol. I think what is potentially happening here, not with this individual asking this question, but I think broadly over social media that there's been a lot of emphasis on cortisol. We have studied cortisol, measured cortisol, and so forth, and there can be some potential misperceptions about it, or should I say, inflation or overclaiming about cortisol. I would say that cortisol is really a response to the hyperarousal and stress that we've been talking about. Therefore, and Alessandra, I'd like to sort of hear what you're saying. It's almost like to get to the core of the issue, really sort of focus on what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking right now? And really, again, addressing it with some of these techniques that Alessandra has mentioned. And that's probably going to prevent you from having any sort of acute cortisol releases that might occur during the night. But I would say more than anything in my 20 years working with people with insomnia, that it's this thing up here and the things that we think that are far more powerful at keeping us awake as opposed to some sort of cortisol that we can't see. But yeah, Alessandra.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we can all relate to it. Like if imagine that you have a big presentation to do, something very important, and that might wake you up in the middle of the night. So that's, stands to the point of, we have to check out how not just the thing that we have to handle the activity that we have that it worries us, but how we perceive it and how we react to it. That is very impactful. The other thing I would like to just throw out some ideas is that mind and body are very well connected. So sometimes we might wake up and we think it's our mind, but actually or at least even if I'm a psychologist, I tend to use questions regarding the body. Like for example, coffee, coffee, if we take a coffee at 4 p.m., for example, uh, we have to understand that the body needs to release that caffeine, and it takes about 10 hours to release at least 70 to 80% of the caffeine in our bodies. Okay, so that is, I don't know, it's just ideas to throw up on the audience to think about the caffeine consumptions, because it's not just coffee. It could be, energetic beverages, or tea or coca, sodas, all these beverages that can have this caffeine. And we have to remember that number, because I think it's a big number to think about that. Like if you take a coffee at 4, it will take, like, for example, 11 o'clock, 12 or midnight, your body will release 70 or 8%. There is still a lot of quantity to be released. And sometimes that release of the caffeine can make the system, jump up and down. Another thing to think about is that even though we feel that alcohol, it relaxes the body because it's a depressant in the body, in the system, a beer or a glass of wine at night, because when we are cooking dinner, speaking with our partners, catching up with the kids, and we're taking a beer or two. Um, we have to think about that. The body thinks of alcohol as a toxin. So the moment we are taking it in, even though it's pleasurable and relaxes the body is making effort to release that alcohol. So it has been studied that when the body finally gets, synthesize all the alcohol out of the system through sweat, through, maybe we have to go to the bathroom, that's something else to think about. That can disrupt the sleep pattern. Another thing to consider is medication, okay? Antidepressants, also for anxiety, that even though it helps us to go to sleep, the depth of the sleep or maybe the quality of the sleep is not the same if we don't take medication. So that is something that usually we don't hear too much about. So those are things that we have to keep in mind, that how's my body? Like even like exercise, if we do exercise at night because we get out of work, and we just have to experiment with those things to see how our body feels better and we prepare the body better for sleep. Food also is important. So with all this in mind, I'm just throwing ideas that yes, the mind is important, but also the body and what we do with the body to prepare it to sleep, that maybe we can tweak things and say, maybe the coffee or maybe the drink or maybe this beer, and just trying to experiment for a couple of days to see how your body feels.
Yes, and measure your sleep as you do these experiments. I might just quickly add that sometimes people worry that cortisol is just something that just takes off. But there's some new research that's not necessarily yet published. There's a lot of people that are sort of testing ways that they can measure hormones. And I spoke about sort of like the forest view of circadian rhythms of cortisol, but people are starting to look at almost like the second by second changes in cortisol, but noticing that cortisol does actually start to come down after it starts to rise. And what people are noticing is that melatonin endogenously in our body seems to be the brake pedal when it comes to cortisol. So melatonin is released over the night. So when people are sort of worried a little bit about their cortisol, if they're sort of thinking that it's, going to start to take off and can't control it, the body already has systems in place to sort of put the brakes on for that.
Thank you. We have time for another couple of questions. So someone was asking if there is any tips, advice on people that work maybe night shifts to avoid obviously negative health consequences on health, negative consequences on health. Sorry, that was.
Yes, yeah, I know what you mean. I did look into this last year. So to be fair, night shift workers, we totally rely on you guys. If you've worked in sleep, you've had to do night shifts and so forth. So we certainly understand the experience. But there are certainly enough data over the decades to sort of show a higher risk of health outcomes. The cause of it initially was that our circadian rhythm is flipped around. We're sort of asleep during the day, we're awake at night. But now there's been probably a second wave of interpretation from people, which is that because we've changed the lighting in the offices and factories and so forth that we are working under, which means that there's been changes in the colors of those lights. And people have been now sort of making these claims that there's lots of blue light that's coming from the new halogen or LED lights. But I think in my reading, and I'm starting to try to get this message out, what seems to have happened is that we've lost a lot of what's called near infrared light in those changes from incandescent bulbs, which had a lot of near infrared light, and now the new LEDs don't. But the greatest source of near infrared light that you can get is actually outside. And there's quite interesting studies. I'll sort of give one where many studies are showing that in city areas, you're more likely to develop or have a higher risk of metabolic disorders. Therefore, because you've got lots of light at night, that's the issue. So they actually take satellite images and they correlate that with people that have had metabolic disorders. But one interesting study went to have a look at what about those people in those urban areas that live around trees. And trees, they are green because they reflect the green light coming from the sun, but they also reflect near infrared light because near infrared light is heat and they don't want the heat, so they reflect that. Therefore, being around trees is actually quite helpful. And the risk of metabolic disorders for the people living around trees in urban areas decreased significantly. So my best advice to people who are night shift workers is that I totally understand, especially in these economic conditions, that you cannot change a job. So there has to be some solution. Some people will say, go and buy these expensive blue light blocking glasses. My advice is when you can, try to go outside and get a healthy dose of near infrared light. Studies that are using artificial sources use 15 minutes per day. So on that guidance, get out and get at least 15 minutes per day and get as many doses as you can.
Thank you.
I see, I don't know if Ilaria, we have a time because I've seen in the chat so many questions regarding pain.
Yeah, I'm making a note of the questions just in case we can't answer them. I'll share them with both Mike and Alessandro, so maybe we can then share them as part of the recording in case we don't get to do all the questions. So thank you very much for all this engagement. Yes, Alessandro, please feel free to answer.
Yeah. And I have quite a lot of experience treating pain from a mental point of view, of course, because I'm a psychologist. But of course, we have to take care of the pain medically. We have to figure out what's happening, what's causing, even if migraines. I mean, we have to sort it out all these medical to sort out all this information and to see what's happening. But from my point of view and what helps people, like I treated, like, for example, multiple sclerosis or fibromyalgia, all these conditions that attack the nervous system and creates pain. One thing is to understand, and this is what Buddha called the double arrow. Okay, so Buddha mentioned this as a metaphor that imagine that you're walking on the woods and someone throws an arrow on your leg, and that is very painful. But instead of taking out the arrow of your leg and healing it, trying to be compassionate with it and to see it, you are just angry at the arrow, complaining about the arrow. You are more, you're doing this loop of negativity through the pain. So one thing is about the pain that I want to point it out, and the second arrow is what our mind does with this pain. So in my practice, when we work with pain, it's about how the mind reacts to pain. If it reacts negatively, what tends to do the mind is to push the pain away. But doing so, it increases. So we have to find other mechanisms to figure it out. No? Acceptance is one of them. And learning how to cope with this in a way that can help us manage the pain from a point of view that will not increase it, but just for example, at least leave it as it is, but not increase it. Okay, and even in my practice, I see, because I use techniques like mindfulness, relaxation, but also hypnosis. There is a lot of research to do on the way the mind can relate to pain. All right, so there is ways to manage pain if that is the case that I see in many questions. How do we respond to pain? Do we accept it or do we push it away? Understanding that if we try to push it away and try to be angry at the pain, what we do is ultimately increase it. It's like, do not think about the pink elephant. It's kind of like that. We think about the elephant. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Alessandro. I think we can do maybe one last question before we wrap up. I saw a few people asking about whether magnesium glycinate actually helps with good sleep. What do you think?
Yes, that is one to go for, but understand the solution should match the problem. So the question is whether you are deficient in magnesium, and it's usually going to be in people that are older because they don't necessarily extract magnesium from their diet so well compared to young people. Therefore, if your diet is not high in magnesium, that's also going to be one of the reasons that might correlate with those sleep problems. So yes, much more so magnesium glycinate, and people have been mentioning magnesium threonate. The research on that is very poor. So that's not the go-to. So glycinate is one to go for.
Cool, thank you. Well, I know we're at time now, so I just want to remind everyone that you can access SleepCycle and Therapyside on Wellhub. I've shared the link or the QR code to download the app. If you want to find out more about SleepCycle and Therapyside in your own time. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you so much for all the questions. And thank you especially to Mike and Alessandro for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. See you guys. Sleep well.
Thank you. That's a nice, well said, Mike. Goodbye to all. Take
See
care.
you.